Hello and welcome to our special program To The Point. The issue of electoral reforms has been debated, discussed at almost all forums. Several reports have been published, several recommendations have been made, but still there seems to be a lot which needs to be done in this particular area. We have with us today none other than the former Chief Election Commissioner of our country, Mr. S Y Quraishi. Sir, welcome to our show. A very interesting topic and something which has been in the want of several measures to be taken over a period of time. You spent a considerable amount of time in that position of the Chief Election Commissioner of our country. First thing which we would like to start with is the recent directives being given by the Supreme Court on the issue of People's Representation Act Section 8(4). The court has struck down the act saying that now those who will be convicted will not be eligible to sit in assemblies or parliament houses anymore. How strong or how effective do you think this particular directive is? What can be the implications?
I think it's a very important judgment, a landmark judgment in fact, and this was an issue which was brought up every now and then, that people found it very strange that if you are in jail, you can contest an election, but you cannot vote. And even the right to vote from jail was contested earlier, and the verdict was that, well, in jail you cannot vote. Now, that discrimination has been ended. Second was that if somebody has been convicted and is disqualified not to contest from the next election, but that disqualification was suspended during the life of the current house. Now, that is what has now been taken away. That means disqualification was there. It was but it was going to be effective from the date of expiry of the present house and before the next house is constituted. Now, in this case, disqualification will come into effect immediately.
Looking at it from the Election Commission's point of view, because Election Commission is the body, organization responsible for conducting free and fair elections in the country, be it at the state levels or in general elections for electing members of parliament. Looking at the records, a particular study says, and if you look at the facts, more than 70 MPs today, elected MPs in the parliament, have serious cases registered against them for serious offences like rape, murder, kidnapping. Do you think that it has been difficult to weed out criminals from politics for quite some time now, since the day we've had our first elections?
You know, what you say actually involved two issues. One is the MPs against whom criminal cases are pending. That means they are not yet convicted. The judgment is about those who have been convicted. Even in the past, on the basis of conviction, after conviction, the people are disqualified. The issue here was whether somebody who has been convicted and disqualified, so why should not the disqualification operate from immediate effect, with immediate effect? So that is what has happened. Regarding the other, you mentioned the figure of 70, but actually there are 162 MPs against whom criminal cases are pending, and against some of them several, and against some of them very, very serious cases.
I was just mentioning the serious ones, which amounts are more than 70 or so.
Sure, yes, sure. So these are the different categories, and pendency of such serious cases against our MPs. Somehow it doesn't behove the political class. It brings our system, parliament, which is the highest body of the people.
Considered the temple of democracy.
It is a temple of democracy, and therefore any question mark which comes on such an institution actually is a matter of concern for everybody. And I would like to mention, we used to have a discussion with our political leaders formally, informally, and they are also very concerned because of some elements against whom cases are pending. The entire class, political class, gets a bad name. Therefore, it is also in the interest of the political class to ensure that anything which discredits them and gives them a bad name should be rectified.
But one argument against this is, one argument against this particular point is that the government in power, will have all the resources at its disposal to go ahead and book the leaders from the opposition, saying that this might result in vendetta politics as well. Do you agree with that?
No, no, no. You know, this is a concern not just of the ruling party, because for the general standard defense of political class is that sometimes false cases are registered against each other for political reasons. Now, this provision therefore can be abused. We have been conscious of that, not just we, Election Commission, but also Law Commission they are all jurists, and they have given a recommendation. They have provided 3 safeguards. Possibility is there for sure, but there are safeguards. Safeguard is, number 1, that this case should have been filed at least 6 months before the election and not on the eve of the election, so that you have some time to get this rectified. Although looking at the lengthy procedures, it's doubtful whether in 6 months, you can get yourself exonerated. Second is that it should be a very serious offence which has a punishment, imprisonment of 5 years or more, heinous offences, rape, dacoity, murder, kidnapping, etc. All other small cases like picketing, protest here, even abuse or slapping, these small things, okay, disregard them, but at least the serious ones. Third, and the most important safeguard is that a court of law should have framed the charges. Now, court of law is independent of politics, and if they have framed the charges, which means that although at that time people say that the judicial application of mine has not happened, but I have talked to many judges and they say that at the time of framing of charges, both parties do contest. The judge can even throw out the case at that stage. Look, I don't believe the charges are true. So the fact that there is a judicial application of mine, and even if prima facie at that stage, so I think that's the third and important safeguard, which will take care of this concern.
So there are safeguards built within. We'll come back to you, Mr. Quraishi. We'll take a short break, but before that, after that rather, we'll come back and talk to you about the issue of the manifestos which are being released by the political parties, the freebies being given by those who are contesting elections, be the parties or the candidates. But before that, let's take a short break out. Welcome back. Former Chief Election Commissioner Mr. S Y Quraishi is still with us. Sir, that was about decriminalization of politics. Now, we've also had one more verdict coming in from the Supreme Court in the recent past on the framing of guidelines. The court has gone ahead and asked the Election Commission to go ahead and frame the guidelines for the political parties on what promises they make in their manifesto, to restrain them from giving out doles of freebies in forms of, we've seen it in elections. You yourself in that chair would have seen it, that there were color TVs, color television sets and mixers, grinders, juicers and all sort of things which we can imagine have been put in manifestos as a promise to the electorate. Do you think that this particular practice sort of demeans the entire process of democracy because you're trying to go ahead and bribe the voters?
This is a more complex issue in the sense that what political parties announce in their manifesto is perfectly legal. Well, they promise schools, buildings, roads, streets, anything. So in that process, also the cheaper food, say rice at 1 rupee or 2 rupees a kg. Now, then where do you draw the line? If you can promise a school building, here you are promising commodities which are of necessity and utility for people. At one level, it can be argued, after all, the entire governance is about prosperity of the people. There should be policies which should enhance your income so that your quality of life goes up, the standard of living goes up, and you can buy these things. Now, if you see it in historical context, when Rajiv Gandhi said that when 100 rupees are released, only 15 rupees reach the people. In that context, at least it can be very well argued that at least when a TV is promised, the whole TV reaches and not just the box. So to that extent, if people are benefiting, so be it. And people have liked it, people are happy. Only when it became so competitive that then criticism was that it has assumed very obscene proportions. That is when the problem came in, which is why the Supreme Court has not said that this is illegal.
No.
Otherwise, they could have declared it illegal straight away. They said this is, although law provides for it, but this is very unfortunate and this needs to be corrected. And Supreme Court itself has said that your election commission should frame guidelines in consultation with the political parties, recognized political parties, and or also Supreme Court said that maybe there is a need for a law. I think Election Commission in a fulfillment of its directive will be calling political parties very soon. I understand that the copy of the judgment has been sent to all the political parties so that they can study the implications, and when the political parties come, they themselves will come up with a solution. Here I would like to mention, if you see it in the context of criminalization and a lot of black money which is used in election, both these initially they seem to be okay that for election you need money, but situation came when one candidate is spending crores, the other candidate perforce has to compete and match that amount, otherwise you have no chance. Similarly, if the one party gives a ticket to a criminal, the other party is forced to give a ticket to a bigger criminal so that he can defeat him. It became a competition. Similarly, this was a competition of freebies, which is what took it to some ridiculous proportion. It can even upset the economy, because in the sense that if you make the promises which are difficult to fulfill. In that context, I think for the health of democracy, this is again a very landmark judgment, and in consultation with political parties are very wise people. They know the pulse of the people and they know the realities, ground realities. I'm sure they would come up with a solution. And I would mention to you the fact that the Model Code of Conduct itself is a creation of political parties. It's a unique thing. You know, when we go around the world, no other country seems to have this kind of an elaborate Model Code of Conduct. So the world appreciates that our political parties have been so responsible that they gave it to themselves as a code of conduct, and which is working very well.
Okay, you mentioned black money and the expenditure in the election. Let's talk about the limits on the expenditure. The limits were raised not long back, very recently in 2011, if I'm not wrong. But do you think that raising the limit of expenditure, maybe revising it after a few years, or doing away with it altogether, are these the solutions? Because we've seen that there are subtle manners and subtle methods through which the candidates end up spending more money than what they're entitled to. We've seen the recent case of a well-known politician making a statement in public domain and then getting a notice from the Election Commission.
Yes. You know, again the issue of expenditure ceiling has been in public debate for quite some time. There are some basic facts which have to be understood. Law has prescribed a ceiling, and for a good reason, so that there is level playing field. Otherwise, anybody with money will walk away with these seats. So there is a ceiling, there is a cap on expenditure. What should be that cap? What is rational ceiling? That has been debated. Well, conventional wisdom decided something, and Election Commission, actually this ceiling is determined by the government, by the Ministry of Law. But in 2011, I had written to the law minister suggesting that since there is a demand for rationalization on some increase, and we came up with a very ballpark figure that since the last fixation of the ceiling, there is about 60% inflation, so therefore let 10 lakh become 16 and 25 become 40. But again, it was not all that scientific. But what exactly is rational ceiling? Let there be agreement. Some political parties say that there should be no limit at all. Others say that even this is too high, the poor people cannot compete. Now, unless there is a political consensus, Election Commission was always of this opinion that if you can come up with a consensus figure, and in any case, it is not Election Commission's discretion, it is the government's decision. But by all means, come up with a consensus. Since that is not happening, there has to be a ceiling. Now, if you remove the ceiling altogether, it is very obvious that the rich people will have an advantage. The level playing field, which is so essential in democracy, then gets knocked out.
What's the way out then in the existing setup? Because I doubt whether there will be a consensus on this one, at least amongst the political parties.
Oh yeah, well, I don't know. There could be when they sit down and get together, they could come up with some formula. But this needs to be discussed and debated nationally. But meanwhile, you know, this one is a legal ceiling. But when you talk of money power in the election, it is more the illegal money which bothers us. For 40 lakhs which are permitted, you know, we know anecdotally that 5 crores, 10 crores, 15 crores are spent. It may well be the truth. But when we operate, the Election Commission only goes by evidence, because we have to follow judicial procedures, and judicial procedures demand evidence. So there has to be a proof that you spend that much money. Now, controlling black money is not easy. To expect Election Commission in 30 days to remove black money from the scene is wishing too much. It cannot happen. Therefore, you know, there is a kind of a cat and mouse game. We had set up an expenditure monitoring division. We have our flying squad. We go and stop people, search the vehicles.
Yeah, very extensive exercises being taken by the Election Commission, especially during that time when the Model Code of Conduct is in force. We'll take a short break here, and when we come back, we'll ask you the next logical question about the idea of state funding of the entire election process, whether or not that is possible. But before that, let's take a short break out here. Welcome back. Mr. S Y Quraishi is still with us. Sir, from the ceiling for the individual candidates, the next logical question is, what about the entire, financing of the entire election setup for the political parties? There have been several ideas which have been floated, and some of the political parties do favor the idea of state funding. As of now, most of the money which political parties get is through private donations, and that is something which has been questioned in time and again, whether or not that ends up influencing the entire concept of public policy making or not. What is your viewpoint? You've been in that chair, you've conducted elections, you've overseen all these things, you would have also got suggestions of this sort. What do you think is the best way out? Is the state funding best way out, or there can be some minimalistic or maximalistic pattern which is there, which exists in several countries elsewhere?
What you said actually involves two issues. One is whether there should be state funding to take care of excessive expenditure in election, the corruption in fighting election. So that's one issue. Second is the transparency of political funding generally, even in non-election time. Now let me first deal with the election expenditure. That as I said, that there is a legal ceiling which is white money, your money you spend from your account, but you can't spend it beyond a point, and you can't spend it on things which have been declared illegal, your money. Second is the source of money. When you are spending your 40 lakhs, we are not bothered about your source of money. There we are really focusing on your expenditure, that it should be within the norms which have been prescribed. State funding as a panacea of this problem, we have always ruled out, for the simple reason, as I said, that it is not the white money which is a problem, it is the black money. Even if we were to underwrite all 40 lakhs from the state funds, what about the 4 crores or 8 crores or 15 crores that you are using? Now 8 crores will become 8 crores, 40 lakhs. What is the guarantee? So therefore, state funding is not the answer. State funding of elections. The other issue is the transparency of political funding, that the money which the parties get should be all by check, and all the expenditure should be by check. That is the other issue. There the source of funding becomes important. And we have been saying that not only it should all be by check, but every year an independent auditor from a panel of auditors given by the Election Commission, independent auditor should audit the account, and it should be put in the public domain. So that what you mentioned was the people could know the quid pro quo, that so-and-so company donated so many crores and the policies are being made to suit that company. People can. I also recently I am coming around to this view that while election funding is not a feasible option at all, but funding of political parties can be considered so that their dependence on dubious fund and black money is reduced. And how will that operate? In several countries they have that system. For instance, for every vote that a party secures, 100 rupees should be given from the state exchequer. And suppose a party had raised 500 crores and of which 400 crores were by cash and we don't know who gave that cash, at least 500 crores are given to them upfront from the upfront in the sense that transparently on the basis of their performance. That's something which works and is workable. At least that will take care of the financing of political parties part of it. Election expenditure, well, maybe require more debate.
It might require more debate. One more very interesting question, and that is something on which the Election Commission has taken a number of steps. That's the issue of paid news. There have been several strict guidelines which have been framed by the Election Commission. But despite that, we've seen in the recent past as well, in the immediate assembly elections which have gotten over in the state of Karnataka, Himachal, Gujarat, there were several cases of paid news which came to light. What is the best way out to ensure that there is a complete stop to this?
Yes, you have pointed out a very, very serious problem which is really distorting the electoral process, and all political parties have been at the receiving end. They have been adversely affected. They would not spare anybody. Not that paid news was not there earlier. We saw that the real estate market and the share market was often manipulated by manufactured news. But politically, it has become a recent phenomenon. There is a talk that there should be self-regulation. Of course, we have our own monitoring mechanism. Election Commission had issued about 2,000 notices. A media monitoring committee in every district watches the broadcast and newspaper. They keep an eye, and whatever they suspect could be paid news is brought to the notice of the Election Commission, and notices are issued. As a result, in fact, there has been a conviction. One MLA has been disqualified, unseated and disqualified. So, Election Commission tries to do its best, but these are problems which are not very easy to handle. I personally feel that an independent regulator, even for the media, is important. To talk of self-regulation is living in a fool's paradise. For self-regulation doesn't work. Although the media said just as political parties have self-regulation through the model code, but then remember that there is an election commission which is operating that model code, which is controlling that. Similarly, there could be an independent regulator outside the government, and which should watch over the behavior of the media.
One last question before we end this discussion. There has been one more platform which has emerged in the recent past as a very strong platform for exchange of views, discussions, as well as maybe a very effective tool of campaigning in the elections, and that's the social media. How does the Election Commission, do you think, or whichever body it is, can regulate this particular medium, because this seems to be the next big thing when it comes to the mode of campaigning?
Yes, social media is another media, and of course it's very important, very influential, but controlling it seems to be a bit of a problem, because quite a bit of it is anonymous. We don't know who it is. Somebody may be tweeting in your name and you may not even know. There may be a Facebook in some bogus name, and while media is monitored by the Election Commission for not only for money or paid news, but also for what it carries. For anything which is abusive, which is a personal attack, or which can create social disharmony, has to be put down. But in social media, we find that there is a lot of irresponsible things floating. But who is responsible? Whether it was done by a party, it will be very difficult to pinpoint. A serious debate on this is required, because this is a new area about which very little is known.
And this will be a challenge for the Election Commission and its officials in the future.
Yeah, for the nation. Yeah,
for the nation as well. Thank you so much, sir. Thank you so much for your views. So this was the former Chief Election Commissioner of India, Mr. S Y Quraishi, sharing his views with us on the entire issue of electoral reforms. We'll come back next week with a different personality and a different topic. Till then, keep watching Rajya Sabha television.